What's good, people? It's Mack and Black. As you can tell, your boy is solo this week. We've got a ton of stuff for you as far as football, UFC, MLB. I will be holding it down solo this week, and my man Nick will be in studio, or I think actually live at Reps. Correct me if I'm wrong, producer Steve. But I think he will be live at Reps next week. I will be in New York. But yeah, we've got a ton to get to today. But again, guys, you know the deal. It's mackandblack.com. Check out the website, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and we've got a new podcast network. It's not technically new, but Pod River Media is the new sort of network that we're working on right now. So check them out as well. I believe it's podriver.com. And Local Level Podcast, another one of our podcasts, sister podcasts, I guess you could say. So check that all out, guys. And then send us a message on the site. You can click on the contact tab, and you can actually, ask us anything from fantasy advice to what you want us to talk about on the next show, or just to say hi, or just for anything that you guys want to pick our brains about, or if you want to talk shit to us, that's fine too. Just go to the contact tab. And then, guys, again, subscribe to all of our stuff on the iTunes. Do us a favor. Go on to iTunes and write us a review and say nice things about us. That would go a long way. I'm just going to jump right into it, guys. It's going to be a little bit of a slower pace podcast this week because of me being solo. So we're going to go at my pace, and I like the idea of being able to attack all of this stuff on my own, even though I do miss my man Nick. So shout out to Nick again. He will be back next week solo, and then you'll see in a couple weeks us back in studio. So worry not, everyone. So yeah, we've got a ton going on right now. The championship series for baseball. We're definitely going to talk a little bit about the ALCS and the NLCS. We had NLCS Game 1 happen yesterday. Game 2, I believe, is on right now. If not, it'll be starting soon. And then the ALCS Game 1 is tonight at 7. So Knicks Yankees are going to be challenged against the Houston Astros, who look really good. I mean, they, that game from Garrett Cole, in the last series really just showed that he might be worth the $200 million that people want to pay him this offseason. So, we'll have to see about that. But, yeah, lots of MLB stuff to talk about. We had NFL, Thursday Night Football as usual, the Giants versus the Patriots. Not really a great game. I think everyone before that game understood who was going to win that game. It was more competitive than I think a lot of people thought it would be, at least for the first 2.5 quarters maybe. And then the Patriots sort of, pulled away and found a way to get a win there. So we'll talk a little bit about that. A ton of Week 6 NFL action this Sunday and Monday, including an early morning start in London for Knicks Bucks. I think they face the Panthers this week. So we'll talk about that and all the action in the NFL. I definitely want to go through the UFC. I believe it was 243 last week. Adesanya versus Whitaker. I've got a lot of opinions on that, including why I think Israel Adesanya might be the future GOAT of the UFC and MMA in general. So if you are wondering what I'm getting at with that, just stay tuned. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about that later. But I'd like to just jump right into some baseball, guys, and just get it out of the way because, quite frankly, there's a lot of football this week that I really am interested in. And right now, I think me and Nick talked about it last week. I like the format of baseball, don't get me wrong, but I think this year more than ever, you have people looking at the AL and saying whoever comes out of there is going to win this thing because St. Louis, they were impressive in what they were able to do in that series against Atlanta. Atlanta's a younger team. Obviously that Game 5 in a 2-2 series, that winner take all, and you give up 10 runs in the first inning, the Braves do. you're not going to win games like that. So, props to the Cardinals, and also, more props to the Washington Nationals. What they did, I believe it was Wednesday, was, I think I think it's a bigger sports and news story than it's getting credit for. What they did to a team that's clearly better than them, first and foremost. I think the Dodgers just have more talent. I think Bellinger's one of the best young stars in the league. Obviously, Clayton Kershaw, goes without saying that he's one of the best in the league. But Dave Roberts has some serious issues managing wise. He's not a guy that you can trust to make the right decisions in the clutch, and that's tough. For a team that's constantly in the postseason and constantly in the conversation for the best team, and always falling short, that's a tough pill to swallow. Like, to have a manager who doesn't know how to manage in big situations is a bigger deal than you would think, because putting Kershaw in the game at that point, to me, was unnecessary. I think what you did, I get it. Rendon is their best hitter. Soto coming up next is their, their next best hitter. So you want your best guys against him. But listen, I know lefty-righty is sort of sometimes overblown, but I think they had the opportunity to let their closer close the game. I like Jensen. I know he's had ups and downs in his whole career, and even more so this year. But I like Jansen. I think he's a solid closer in this league. I think he's got good stuff and enough stuff to close out that game, even if it has to be maybe a 5 or 6 out save. They bring in Kershaw, and he gives up 2 solo home runs on 3 pitches. And then, if that isn't bad enough, I believe it was the 10th inning, and Joe Kelly is in the game. He'd already pitched an inning. I believe he pitched the bottom of the 9th or the top of the 9th. And they bring him back in for the 10th, and he loads the bases, and you've got your closer in the bullpen ready to go. And you let him go one batter too long, and he gives up a grand slam to Howie Kendrick. And the rest is history, as they say. So to me, if you're a Dodgers fan, you've got to look really deep into like who your management team is right now. Dave Roberts doesn't seem to be the guy to get it done, get them over the hump. I think Nick has mentioned them as the Buffalo Bills of the MLB, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. So that's a tough loss for the Dodgers, and we'll see what they do over the offseason, because I'm not sure what their thought process is going into next year, but I don't necessarily see them in a position where they have to like shed payroll or anything like that. I know they got the money, but I just feel like at this point you've got to like do something different now. I think I think we're past the stage where it's like, all right, give them another year. I think you've got to go out and make significant changes. I don't necessarily think you kick Kershaw out the door. I think it's pretty obvious that their offense is always going to be okay. And they could add I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and added a Rendon or, somebody like that to really bolster the offense and third base or something like that. But, I think their problem is more managerial than anything. So, and, again, I don't want to take away anything from the Nationals. Props to them. Soto's a tremendous young player. I think Adam Eaton had a great series, and their pitching is lights out. I mean, Scherzer, Corbin, and then Strasburg. And yesterday, their weakest pitcher on the staff had a no-hitter going through eight innings against St. Louis. And, St. Louis didn't pitch bad themselves. They only gave up 2 runs, and they lost the game 2-0. So St. Louis got to feel a little bit better about themselves. But, again, you're at home. St. Louis was and wasn't able to capitalize on that, and Washington just took serious momentum from St. Louis, because now you got your 3 best pitchers and 3 of the best pitchers in the game going in over the next 3 games. It's an uphill battle right now for St. Louis, and props to Washington for that. And then again, game 1 tonight, guys. The Astros are hosting Knicks Yankees. The Yankees, I believe, added Aaron Hicks to the roster, added CC Sabathia to the roster. So they are sort of close to full. They got their full arsenal now, and the Yankees are dangerous because they sort of scuffled through some of that series against the why am I blanking on it? Minnesota? I'm sorry, but they ended up sweeping the series, which is kind of crazy. Like, they had ups and downs during the series and still swept the series, and they had some time off too, and they were waiting on the Astros series to finally finish. So at the end of the day, man, if you're the Yankees, you've got to be really excited because you have a chance to take Game 1 on the road and really steal some momentum. And they need it at this point because, quite frankly, I think Houston's pitching staff is going to be the biggest issue right now for the Yankees because, we've seen this Astros offense hit a little bit of a snag. It's not impossible for them to not do as well as we expect of them because, people forget it was a couple years ago now that they won the World Series, and it's been a couple years now since they haven't been back to the World Series. So it's possible to beat this team, especially this offense, but if you can get to this pitching staff, you're in a really good position. So the Yankees have a chance at that tonight. So we will see if they're made for this. And by the way, it is a 3:00 start, so 3:08 for the St. Louis and Washington game, and then 7:08 first pitch for the Yankees and the Astros game. So check it out tonight, guys. But yeah, we'll definitely discuss a little bit more baseball definitely next week. I will try and do my best to call in because I definitely want to discuss, we may see one of these series ending by then. Certainly that Washington-St. Louis series has a chance, especially if Washington can win today. They go up 2-0 and go back home. We may see an end to that series, by midweek. So I'll do my best to call in next week because I don't want to miss talking about that. But yeah, let's jump right into some football, guys, because there's a ton of football stuff to talk about. And I know people are they want us to talk, college football. There's a lot of college football that went on last week, but there's really nothing that's unpredictable that's happening right now in college football. I think, we have, the Oklahoma-Texas game today, was promising, but, Oklahoma looks like they're going to take that one. I think it's 27-17 with 10 minutes left right now, and they look like the better team, and both teams had this scuffle before the game, so that's always fun in college football. And I think both teams got penalized for it. Yeah, okay, fine. You want to do that? That's fine. I miss the days when you could just sort of have a pregame scuffle and everything would be fine during the game. But and then Georgia is tied 17-17 right now, the number 3 team in the country against unranked South Carolina. I'm actually watching that game right now, so that's why my eyes are a little bit diverted. But South Carolina has a really good chance right now. I believe they have the ball with a minute 33 right now. So yeah, they got the ball with a minute 33. So they're going to try and drive down. We've got Alabama against Texas A&M, so the number 1 team against 24th ranked Texas A&M later. FSU, Nick's Seminoles are going to be facing the number 2 Clemson team. I'm sure they're hoping for a giant win there to upset Clemson. And then later on tonight, you got Penn State versus Iowa. Iowa, I know they're still ranked and they're still doing pretty all right, but I'm not necessarily a huge, I'm not really big on Iowa right now, and I think Penn State, 5-0 right now, they look good, so I think I'll take them. And then LSU versus Florida, that's going to be the big one tonight, so hoping to make it back for that one. But yeah, if you guys are wondering why we don't talk much college football, man, we've only got like 3 hours to talk about stuff right now. It's hard enough to talk about. I've got a big enough mouth. I can fill up 3 hours by myself. Nick is verbose as they come. He can talk. That's why me and him do so well together, because we can just talk for hours. But there's just, especially with NFL season sort of kicking off, and both of us are very invested in NFL. It's very hard to talk a lot of college football, but for those of you who are looking at, possible matchups today, that's what we're looking at. A couple of good games later on today, and, again, one going on right now that I'm going to continue to watch, and I'll give you guys a little bit of an update on as, sorry guys. So let's jump into some NFL football, guys, because The Giants and the Patriots played on Thursday night. The Patriots came out a little lazy. I wouldn't even, maybe lazy is not the right word. They came out a little lackadaisical, a little bit unfocused. Didn't look like they were invested in putting a whooping on the Giants like everyone thought that they would. I thought it was an interesting call for them to go for it on 4th and short on the first drive of the game and lose that, or not able to convert on that and give the Giants back the ball. But I think Belichick is playing with this supreme confidence in his defense right now. This defense is off to one of the most amazing starts that any defense ever in the history of the NFL has ever gotten off to. Simple as that right now. They are a tremendous unit, but they're scoring fantasy points at an alarming rate, scoring touchdowns, pick sixes, scooping scores, interceptions, sacks, just turnovers in general. This is a team that's like really, really on top of their game right now. And that unit, the offensive unit, not so much. I think, the Patriots offense, Sony Michel, he's a guy that I think they're content with just being a guy who gets 3 or 4 yards every run. I get it. He had like a dynamic career at Georgia where he played with Nick Chubb and they were a nice 1-2 punch, and Chubb is now in Cleveland. But the Giants are not that good of a defense. They very shorthanded on offense, but as a defensive unit, they're okay, but the Patriots should have been able to run right through them. This Patriots offense, they did lose Josh Gordon later in the game to an injury. I think, if I'm not mistaken, everything is fine with him. He should be able to play next week. But they were scuffling out of the gate. And then they gave up a couple of turnovers themselves, and then the Giants just couldn't convert. They kept turning over the ball themselves. And I'll be honest with you, I was flipping between this game and the Blackhawks game, and I found myself more interested in the Blackhawks game. It's early season for the Blackhawks, so I think it's probably natural for me to be a little bit more invested into that game than it was the football game between two teams that I have no allegiance to. But, the Patriots take the game 35-14. The score doesn't really indicate how close the game was for a long time. I think if you looked at 35-14, you would have thought it was a blowout from the beginning. But, credit the Giants, man. No one really gave them a shot. And listen, Daniel Jones got a lot of credit for beating up on Nick's Tampa Bay Buccaneers and then sort of coming back and having a mediocre game the next week. But he throws 3 picks. And I feel bad for the guy because he doesn't really have the type of weaponry right now that you would expect out of an NFL offense. Saquon out, their backup is out, so they're on their 3rd string running back. And then you've got your best offensive player, probably other than Saquon, Evan Ingram, out for the game as well. And then their offensive line is not that great, so he was in trouble a lot of the game and threw 3 picks and just didn't really have what it takes to beat that New England team, which is, they needed to make an effort to run the ball and then really put Daniel Jones in a position to get first downs. I think they made a huge mistake by making him try and win the game right out the gates. You give up, when you turn the Patriots over on their first drive on 4th down, you've got all that momentum, and I think the Giants lost that momentum almost immediately. I think they ended up punting that drive, but then the next drive they turned it over, and then they've had turnover problems all season. But New England was just far too good for them, and I think it rang true that New England had a comfort level that like they would be fine the whole game. I think that's the genius of Belichick is, he's going to do what he feels like is necessary to win a game, and he doesn't really care if it's pretty. He doesn't really care if people buy into what he's doing. There's really no sense of like trying to make other people understand what you're doing. And that's what makes him, I think, so special. I think that, you put him in the same category as like a Greg Popovich or, I think Popovich is a perfect example actually. But yeah, Popovich is, unconventional sort of ways of doing things. Sometimes you look at him and you're like, why are you playing that guy? Why aren't you playing this guy? But at the end of the day, you really can't ever question either one of these guys because they know what they're doing. And I think Belichick, he was, really unbothered by the start. He puts off this sort of like, oh, I'm mad persona, or I don't really, I don't really like what's going on. And at the end of the day, I still think deep down he's kind of like, we got them where we want them. And if you got people overlooking your team, like I think a lot of people were like clamoring, oh my God, the Giants, they're in this game, and they were in the game for pretty much the whole first half. And they had that long touchdown to Golden Tate, but again, that didn't really do much for them at the end of the day. So 35-14, the Patriots remain perfect. They are one of two remaining perfect teams left in the league. The other are my San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to call them my 49ers because I've loved them since the offseason, and I really I do think that this team has a chance to be the best team in the NFC. I will say that because, first of all, the NFC has not looked that impressive this year. Me and Nick talked a lot of garbage about the AFC over the offseason. It's not that we said that they were bad. I think one of us or both of us said that, they might even be the better conference. But I think the NFC had more storylines in it. And the NFC, obviously the Bears have, taken a step down, regardless of them bouncing back. But I think that loss last week against the Raiders was gut-wrenching. I get it was in London. There's a lot of factors in it. Never want to judge a team on one game, but that was not a good game for our guys. And the first half was atrocious. They came out and did a good job of coming back, and then next thing you know, they're losing the game. But yeah, back to my point, the NFC is just, right now not showing that they have elite teams in there quite yet. I think the Eagles are sort of up and down. Dallas is up and down. You certainly have the Rams and the Seahawks are up and down themselves. And then, you got the 49ers. So, the 49ers continue to just show that they have the all-around team effort to win football games. Those are the only two undefeated teams left for us guys. We'll talk a little bit more about whether the 49ers have a chance to stay perfect this week. They go on the road to the Rams and try and stay perfect. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's get into some of the early window games tomorrow. As I mentioned before, another London game this week, and it starts at 8:30 a.m. That to me, Nick and I talked about this last week, but if you're going to do shows, if you're going to do, I say shows because we complained about it with the UFC too. If you're going to do games in London or overseas, don't make them start at 8:30 a.m. I get it. It's Sunday. People have the opportunity to wake up that early, but I don't know about everyone else, but I get most of my life stuff done on Sunday mornings. So between 9 a.m. and 12 is when I'm doing everything around my house, making sure that I'm, prepared for the week. I'm not really, it's not like I'm not going to be up. I just don't really like the idea of having a game at 8:30 a.m. But that's where we're going to be looking at next week. Tomorrow for the Panthers and the Buccaneers. This is technically a home game for the Buccaneers, which Nick mentioned. That's dumb. It's just dumb to say this is a home team for you guys, but you're going to be in London. Maybe they get some monetary gain out of that, but I don't see any reason why we should be sending people to London and making one of them the home team. Let's find a way around that. If you want to play in London, that's fine, but let's not give people an unfair advantage because the Buccaneers are not the only team that's had this where they're going to, I think the Raiders too, are going to be away from home for a stretch of like 5 weeks or 4 weeks. That's too much. That's way too much. Can't have that happen, especially if you're going to send them to London. Maybe make it a away game for. I don't know how the math works on that. Quite frankly, I'm not really that smart in that way. But figure a way out, because if you want to play games in London, that's fine. But let's not put teams at a disadvantage because of it. So the Carolina Panthers are 3-2 right now, and looking pretty good under Kyle Allen. And the Bucks are 2-3, coming off of a loss last week against the New Orleans Saints. Tough loss for them against the Saints on the road. The defense couldn't stop anyone. I don't know if anyone had a chance to actually take a look, dive deep into the game. New Orleans just kept driving the ball on them, and I have to give Jameis, or not Jameis, but the offense of the Bucks credit. They tried to keep their team in the game, and they tried to do their best to, make effective moves, and they scored, quite okay in that game. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough as they lost. It was 31-24. So, I know that there was a last-second touchdown that made it look a little bit closer, but still, you're in the game at the end of the day. So they were one score away. So, the Buccaneers, man, are a young team. And their new coaching staff, and a lot of people like to talk shit to my man Nick for being a fan of the Bucs and having belief in his team, but I don't. I think it's okay to look at your team on paper and look at your team in the way that they've performed and feel positively about them, because they have had some positive spots in the season. So, is Jameis better than Mahomes? No, but. I think there's a sense of, one thing I love about Nick's personality is I think there's a sense of like, he's fucking with you, but, he wants you to think like, come right into this trap right over here. Yeah, I think Jameis is better than Mahomes, come see me. And I think it's, I think that's the radio personality in him. I think that's just the personality in him, period. And that's why I love it. Quite frankly, I do that to my friends all the time with people, and my teams. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you have seen the Bucs play in earlier games this year, especially like that Carolina game was a great example. They've had some bright spots, but they've let some games slip through their fingers. Their defense, as good as their defense has looked at times, it's not quite where it needs to be, especially in the secondary. They have a hard time covering guys. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting game because, I'm interested to see how both of these teams adjust to playing at 8:30 a.m. On their body clock. Say what you want about, you could play any time and it doesn't really matter. If your body clock is at 8:30 a.m. and you go, I know the Bears went, we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about their game last week, but I think they arrived to London on Wednesday. I want to say Wednesday or Thursday. And I think 3 or 4 days is not enough to get acclimated. I know it's tough with the schedule that like you can't necessarily get out there the day after the game, your previous game. But I would have loved to see the Bears try and get out to London a little early to fight some of that the body clock issues. Now, I don't think the Bears have as much of an excuse of that because it was a 12 o'clock kickoff no matter what for them. So again, body clock was 12 o'clock kickoff for them. So it's not as a big of a deal. But for these two teams that are going to play tomorrow morning, at 8:30 a.m., they're used to basically getting ready for the game, not even playing the game for another 4 hours. So they're going to have to do some adjusting, but. By the way, guys, the Panthers are 2.5-point favorites, road favorites. And I'm going to go with Carolina here. It makes it a little easier that Nick's not here. I don't have to have him yell at me about this. But no, I mean, the thing about this is Carolina has played tremendously since Kyle Allen came in and played quarterback for them. I've been waiting to pass judgment on this kid. And I think I'm ready to pass a little judgment that I think he's pretty good. He's, 60 for 90, 674 yards, and 5 touchdowns, I believe, in 3 games. It's pretty impressive. He's been able to run the offense pretty impeccably, and Christian McCaffrey's running like a madman. Last week, that game, the Jaguars should be quite embarrassed about the way that they got romped that game because their offense scored 27 points themselves. They should have been in that game, but they gave up 200-plus scrimmage yards to McCaffrey, let him score 3 touchdowns, and then gave up another 50-yard touchdown to his backup. So to me, man, the Jaguars maybe that defense isn't as good as we think they are. I mean, I give them a lot of credit because you look at the names that are on that defense, the Calais Campbell's, the Miles Jack, and we talked about how big we are on Josh Allen, but with no Jalen Ramsey and some of the issues that they've had in the secondary period, maybe it's time to start to rethink the way we look at the Jaguars. But Carolina looked really good in that game, and especially the offense. And I think they gave themselves a little bit momentum moving forward. I don't know what the status of Cam Newton is right now. I think Cam, certainly has some serious issues that he has to get sorted out because he tried to play through them in the first 2 games and looked garbage and couldn't make, elementary throws. So, Kyle Allen, has got to feel some confidence here. And I think this could be another confidence builder to get to 4-2 and a bye week next week and getting ready for, a season where they may be able to win this division. The Saints have looked okay under Teddy Bridgewater, but no Breeze for them for a couple more weeks. They've had some, sort of their ups and downs. Obviously, Tampa Bay has had their own ups and downs, and Atlanta is ass this year, so, we don't really have to talk about them, but still, Carolina has a chance to go 4-2, take a really nice lead, or take a step forward because I think the Saints would still be ahead of them if I'm not mistaken because they're 4-1. Yeah, so with the loss this week, with a Saints loss this week to the Jaguars, they could possibly overtake first place. So. Interesting game this week in London at 8:30, guys. Don't forget, if you are up at that time, take a look at it. It should be on NFL Network, I think. Maybe CBS, I don't know. But, yeah, I'm going to go with the Panthers in that one, guys. I just think right now CMC is running crazy, and then you've got some standouts on that defense too. Brian Burns is a guy I mentioned a couple weeks back. He was one of the lone bright spots of them when they were losing football games, and now he's looking like the defensive rookie of the year. That's how good he looks. So yeah, we'll see about that one, but yeah, I'll go ahead and take my chances with the Panthers in that one, even though I think it'll be a high scoring game. I think I'm hoping that I can get some fantasy points out of Godwin, and yeah, I speaking of the offensive, output, I don't think Tampa Bay's in that trouble on the offensive side of the ball. I just think right now defensively they have a lot of holes that they need to fix, and once they do fix those holes, I think they're going to be pretty good. Because I think Todd Bowles has an idea of what he wants to do. I just think it's hard to do what you want to do when you don't have the personnel available, and I don't think they have the personnel available right now. So it's hard to blame a team for not having a stacked roster. In the secondary because there's not a lot of teams that do. But at the same time, I think, they've got some major additions. And I heard Nick, I think it was on one of the other podcasts he does that I listen to, talk about, maybe trading for Jalen Ramsey, maybe trading for Chris Harris, maybe trading for Patrick Peterson. I don't know, man. Do you feel like this year is the year? Okay, if the Bucs were 3-2, 4-1, and you're like, man, we have major holes right now, but we're also in a spot where we can possibly take this thing or make a race for, playing in the postseason, maybe you give up some draft capital for that, but otherwise, why would you? I think, you've got a couple of, really good games under your belt right now, but is that enough to really, mortgage the future for? I'm not sure. So, and trust me, man, I get it. You know, you see some of the holes on your team early in the season, and you're like, let's fix it right now. And that's not always how it works. You know, you can't just, you know, snap your fingers and have an all-pro cornerback. It takes a lot of draft capital nowadays to do that, and maybe not always the most realistic option. So, again, Panthers, I think we'll take that one against the Buccaneers, but I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Next game, guys, we've got Seattle, who is 4-1. They are visiting the Cleveland Browns, who did me a huge favor on Monday night last week and shit the bed because I had the 49ers defense that I'm streaming in a couple of leagues, and that 49ers defense is amazing. I don't think it was like a fluke where it's like, oh, this game, you know, they really came through. No, I think that 49ers defense is for real. They're going to create turnovers. That front four is nasty. They've got like 6 or 7 guys that can get after you, which is, you know, some guys don't even have 2 or 3 of those guys. So if you're the 49ers, you've got to be happy about that performance. But yeah, Cleveland definitely did not look good. You know, I know a lot of people want to put, you know, bad juju on Baker Mayfield because he turns over the ball a lot, not doing well. But listen, you don't lose 31-3 because of your quarterback. You know, your quarterback has a lot to do with that, but you don't lose it solely, lose 31-3 because your quarterback sucks. You know, he turned over the ball, forced in a lot of balls to Odell, and he paid for it. You know, Richard Sherman picked him off early. I know that they had a bunch of sacks, strip fumbles, stuff like that, and I think a couple interceptions rather. But you know, the thing about them is, you know, the Browns rather, when they run the ball really well, they do really well. You know, we saw that against Baltimore, and that's why I picked them against Baltimore, because I thought that they were going to run the ball really well, and I thought we were going to maybe see Baker take the next step and maybe build more chemistry with Odell and build more chemistry with Jarvis. You know, maybe not Jarvis because he's been there for longer, but, you know, maybe the Njoku injury is a little bit more than we, you know, it has a little bit more of an effect than we wanted to say it did. So to me, you know, we've got to look at this thing in context. I think the Browns, everyone wanted to crown them as the champions after they traded for Odell and made a lot of good moves. Not just Odell, you know, the Olivier Vernon thing was pretty good move. You know, I thought getting Zeitler out of there and getting back what you got back, which was Olivier Vernon and you know, and Odell, and again they traded Peppers for him as well. His name is escaping me, the defensive guy, the safety. So, you know, the Browns right now, man, everyone wanted to crown them, and then they came into the season, you know, hot and cold, and I think people are ready to give up on this team. I'm not ready to give up on this team. I just think right now they've got a lot of figuring of things out to do. And Freddie Kitchens, you know, he got hired on because he had a good relationship with Baker Mayfield, and at the end of last season had them really going on the offensive side of the ball. And then teams, I think, figured that out and figured Freddie Kitchens out. And his play calling has been atrocious. I mean, I remember watching that Monday night game and thinking, you know, this guy is calling plays like he's down 21-0, and he wasn't at that point. You know, they had given up some bad plays, but their defense was holding on some occasions. Robbie Gould misses some kicks. The 49ers offense doesn't look that great. You know, they had that big burrito run early, and I think that gave the crowd and the 49ers some momentum, and I think from there it was over. And then, yeah, listen, to get to Seattle, that game against the Rams last week was impressive. You know, I don't necessarily think the Rams are the best team in the league, but I think the Rams are a team to be reckoned with, and I think they showed that, you know, they can score points on them. And now Seattle with confidence, man, is scary. When you got Russell, who's got 2 running backs he can hand the ball off to that are pretty effective, multiple wide receivers now with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Will Dissly has come out as a tremendous option at tight end, and, you know, to slip a little fantasy relevance into here, you know, chances are he's not available, but if you got Will Dissly, you should be very happy right now. And if you don't have Will Dissly, you should probably start to make some room or try and acquire this guy because, everything they said a lot about the guy over the offseason, but I think a lot of people chalk that up to they don't have any better players, and not a lot of people had seen much of Disley because he's been injured. To be fair, he's been injured a lot in his first couple of years. Hasn't been on the field a ton, and when he was on the field, though, he's been pretty effective. And then he missed week 1, and I think he just fell off people's radar. And then since week 1, or since the end of week 1, so the beginning of week 2, he's been, I think, a top 3 fantasy tight end, and I think targets-wise, I think he sees more red zone targets than any other tight end in the league. And he's shown that Russell trusts him, and he's not just a red zone guy either, surprisingly. He's a guy that they like to get involved all over the field. They'll throw stuff long to him. They'll do their best to get him involved, pretty consistently throughout the game. So I like Seattle in this game, man. The reason why I like Seattle specifically because I think their defense is coming together now. They acquired Clowney, and I think the first couple of weeks he was just kind of running around, trying to do things, using his supreme athletic and, just his talents overall and not necessarily working within the defense. And I think now he's starting to work within the defense. I think him and Bobby Wagner, work really well together on those first 2 levels. Seattle has some secondary problems. Certainly, we saw that against the Rams. They certainly miss Earl Thomas. They miss, even Richard Sherman from three years ago. But still, the way that this Seattle team plays on offense, I think they'll have a good shot. And I think the way that the Browns turn over the ball right now, specifically Baker, is troubling. But, I'm not going to count them out of this game because Seattle's missing 2 of their best offensive linemen. And if Cleveland is smart, they will try and take as much of an advantage on that as possible. Because, if you think about when Russell Wilson doesn't do too well, it usually has to do with his protection. And, them not being able to keep him off his ass and also just not being able to give him a clean pocket. And when he tries to do too much with his feet, sometimes it the first couple of years of his career worked out. But the last couple of years of his career, it's been like, we don't want to get this guy hurt. He's not exactly a spring chicken. I mean, he's not old, but he's not a guy that's getting any younger. And he's also a guy that, has had injuries in the past that have had to do with that. So you don't necessarily want that. And the way he's playing this year as a passer, he's been one of the best in the league when it comes to that. And he's in the MVP conversation, I think. Right now, when you take a look at, stats, 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns in 5 games is pretty damn impressive. And with Mahomes sort of cooling off the last 2 weeks, who knows? I think Russell has a shot, but I'm going to go ahead and take Russell and the Seahawks in this one. I think right now the defense of the Browns is going to be in a tough position, and I think they're going to score. I think they're going to score less than they give up right now because the Browns just don't have it figured out, and they're going to have to do some soul searching to figure that out. Next is a pretty intriguing matchup. I think one of the most intriguing of the week, honestly. The 3-2 Houston Texans come in and visit the 4-1 Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City coming off of their first loss of the season on Sunday Night Football. Mahomes, even in that Ravens game, he had touchdowns, but was did okay and ended up securing the win for them. Then the next week they visit the Lions, and he didn't have the greatest game. And the Lions' defense is pretty good, to be fair, but he didn't have the greatest game. And then last week, the Colts surprised the world. I'll be honest with you. I thought that was going to be a slaughter. I thought Indianapolis has shown us more than what they are this season, and I think, I thought Kansas City showed us less of what they are this season, and I might have been wrong because the Colts came out and kicked the Chiefs in the teeth, and pressured Mahomes heavily and hurt him at one point. I think his ankle, was an issue for him, which. I will say this. They've got to be careful with that, man. He hurt that same ankle, I think, in the first game of the season, and he didn't miss a play. And then last week, he got hurt, very visibly hurt, and then I don't think he missed a play either in that game. So, Patrick is a younger kid, and he doesn't have as much wear and tear, but I still think you got to play it a little bit safer than Kansas City's playing it right now. I understand that he's what makes them go, but I don't think they're thinking big picture with this ankle thing. He's apparently fine. He said he's fine. He's practiced all week. So, he says he's fine. He's definitely going to play, and there's not an issue. But he's a warrior. I love Patrick Mahomes. I think he's a guy that, I think Bears fans will be kicking themselves for the next 15 years watching him do stuff in Kansas City. He's going to get a massive extension, apparently a record extension, $200+ million. We're talking basketball type contract shit with this guy. But they've got to be careful. He's the future, but be careful because your team is still in it and it's early in the season. You don't want to, overdo it in week 5 of the season. But the Texans and the Texans do visit the Chiefs tomorrow, and the Chiefs are 4-point favorites in this one. Both teams. Both teams are a little bit nicked up right now. I think Tyreek Hill is a game time decision. He's clearly their best receiver, but I think Patrick has missed the dynamic that he gives this offense. When the Raiders game happened, it was like Tyreek had missed a week, and they were still slinging the ball downfield and really able to get guys like Hardman and even like Robinson and even Kelsey to a certain extent downfield. And I think the last 2 games we haven't seen that. I think Detroit did a great job of pressuring him and covering stuff deep. And then last week, the Colts did the same thing. The Colts just really simply brought it to Patrick, put everyone up front, and made sure that they, that they stop the, stop the offensive line and really got pressure in. And sorry guys, I'm distracted because South Carolina just won against the number 3 team in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia just missed a field goal, and in the second overtime, South Carolina just won against Georgia. That will certainly knock Georgia out of the number 3 spot, and I don't think out of top 10, but it's a tough loss for them because I believe this is the first win. This is a first top 25 win for South Carolina over like 5 or 6 years. So, and South Carolina hasn't been that great themselves this year. So, big win for that program and big loss for Georgia. Man, that's a tough loss because they still got some tough games ahead of them, even in the SEC. And then they've got the SEC championship. And oh man, this is going to be a tough season for Georgia. And credit to Will Muschamp in South Carolina. Pretty good win there. Sorry, guys. Texans versus Chiefs this week. The Chiefs. We talked about the Chiefs last week. The Texans last week. Big game against Atlanta. Atlanta just. I don't think they really care about playing football right now. I think Matt Ryan is lost. I think they feel stuck with Matt Ryan. I think, body language on that team is like really trending towards like mutiny. It's like nobody really wants to play for Dan Quinn anymore. I get it. Atlanta has had some injuries even the last few years and this year, but 1-4 and the numbers even trick you. If you look at their numbers and their peripheries, you're like, they're not that bad. No, they're bad. But, somehow, they always find a way to, like, score in the last 4 minutes. And then, they've had a couple games this season where they could have been, like, close to shut out, and they score a couple of touchdowns late, and it makes it look a little bit better. But if you've been paying attention, even in their only win of the season, Atlanta, they still have looked pretty rough, and I think their win was against the Eagles, and that was on that one Julio Jones, long play, which you can't really pray for those all the time. So the Texans took care of business against them. The Texans have their own problems right now, though. Defensively, they're not that great. Offensively, they rely pretty heavily right now on Deshaun Watson to do everything, and I think that's going to be their downfall at the end. Because don't get me wrong, Carlos Hyde's okay, Duke Johnson's okay. I know they made efforts to go out and get Laramie Tunsil, and they went out and got Kenny Stills, and they did their best to get whatever they could back for Clowney, but there's some serious issues with this Texans team, specifically on the defensive side of the ball too. J.J. Watt is sometimes invisible this season, sometimes doing pretty well, but also just the team around him, the defense around him is just generally worse. I think it's pretty obvious that in some of the games even that they won this season, that they really sometimes have no business winning those games. So, I think the quarterback matchup is very interesting. I think right now though, I think Kansas City's defense, I don't think they played that bad last week. I know the Colts offense is not a game breaker, but I don't think that they were like terrible last week. I think they did a pretty good job, and I think it was really more so that the Colts did a tremendous job on defense, and Pat really didn't seem to be confident in running the ball and confident in his running backs, period, I think. Damian Williams came back last week, and he got the bulk amount of the snaps. I think Shady McCoy had a fumble, and then maybe he went into the doghouse a little bit. But Kansas City, they've got some mental issues to go through right now because, Travis Kelce isn't playing. He's getting in fights with his coaches on the sideline. He's like fumbling balls, and, the team is a little lackadaisical. I think they're so used to like, okay, we've got Jesus on our team. Why fuck around? We've got the best player in the league on our team. We'll just hang out here and wait until he gets us the ball. And I think that's the wrong mentality. And I think, I think them losing that Detroit game would have been a little bit more of a wake-up call, but then they won that game, and then I think they came in with this supreme confidence that, like, even if we play, dog shit for most of the game, we've still got the best quarterback in the league, and I think we'll be able to be fine. And yeah, last week it didn't ring true, and props to the Colts, I don't think anybody in the world probably picked them. But yeah, this week I like the Chiefs. I think they're at home. They play well at Arrowhead. Regardless of what happened last week, I still think they play a pretty good football at Arrowhead, and I think they'll bounce back. I think you're going to see more concerned effort here to control clock and control the ball for the Chiefs this week. Not give the ball too much to Houston. I think teams are now keying in on stopping DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that's hurt. It's hurt Watson in some aspects, but you didn't see it last week because Fuller had a tremendous game. And then even like Kiki Kuti was open most of the game, and he was getting tight ends involved a lot. So you didn't see much of Hopkins, but I think teams are content with seeing how other people on this offense work, and just trying to shut down DeAndre. I think that's what Kansas City will do, and I quite frankly like them very much in this game. Like I said, I think they are, they're only really slight favorites right now. I think it's I don't know, I have a terrible memory, obviously, because I just said it earlier. I think it was, 4 points. So I like them even in the betting aspect, because I think if you're giving Houston 4 points, I still think it's going to be one of those where it's not going to be as close as we think it is. I think, Houston's secondary is not going to be able to keep up, especially if Tyreek Hill's back. If Tyreek Hill's back, that adds such a huge dynamic weapon to the Chiefs that it's just going to be tough for the Texans. So I'll take the Chiefs in that one. Oh, man. This next game, we've got the 0-5 Washington Redskins going against the 0-4, so they're better. The 0-4 Miami Dolphins. If Nick was here, I don't even know if we'd talk about this game. Nick hates the Redskins. I hate the Dolphins. And I think just both of these teams right now are very content with riding out this season and just giving themselves a shot at next season. Jay Gruden did get fired last week, which maybe 2 years too late. You had a chance to, fire him after he sucked the last 2 seasons. But, they felt that Patriots loss last week was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And Jay Gruden no longer the head coach. And all you hear out of Washington this week is this is the best week of practice we'd had all season. And, subtle but not so subtle shots at their former coach. Right now, the Redskins I think Case Keenum will be back in this game after McCoy started last week, but they're banged up. They're going to be missing some guys. Washington is, and I think Miami's coming off a bye, so that's why they're 0-4 and not 0-5. But Miami's got the home advantage, but I believe I think Washington is a 3.5 point favorite right now. So. I like Washington. The reason why I like Washington is because, first of all, I got to see them against the Bears, and I think that defense is better than a lot of people think they are. And the defense is the only reason why they were in some games. They were in that game against the Cowboys somehow. And pretty crazy to think about. They were semi in that game against New England last week until it got crazy. So. I like, I'm not even going to spend too much time on this, one. I think Washington runs the ball a shit ton. I think Miami just doesn't have the defense right now. And I think offensively, they threw Josh Rosen into the fire. Now they have bye week under the belt, so they're thinking, we can develop this kid now. He's got a shot to, find some receivers. I think they'll be playing from behind most of the game because they don't really care to run the ball themselves for some reason. Whether it has to do with, them being inept at it is another story. But, I'm going to take Washington in this one. I wouldn't be surprised to see Adrian Peterson have a big game this week. I think he's 3 rushing touchdowns away from some milestone. I think it's into second place all time, maybe. And that, Adrian Peterson was a guy who was a healthy scratch in week 1, and Jay Gruden basically said, I'm not gonna run the ball 50 times, but if I do, I'll go to him. And then Darius Geis gets hurt, and then by the way, Adrian Peterson is our starter now. And then I don't think Adrian took too well to that. And then I don't think he took too well to the fact that in that Bears game, it's crazy because the media doesn't miss anything when it comes to controversy. If there's 1/2 a second on the screen of controversy, they catch it and it's on the next day. And I think they missed this one where Peterson was livid on the sidelines in that Bears game because the Bears were up big and it was pretty much over and they were on the goal line and they didn't have Adrian Peterson in the game. And the guy is 3 touchdowns away from some sort of milestone. So I think that, that's one of those things that rubs the whole team the wrong way. I'll be honest with you. Adrian Peterson is one of the most respected guys in the league. He's an OG, and people look at him a little bit differently than they do other veteran players. I think Adrian Peterson still has this shine and allure to him as if he's, people forget a little bit about what this guy was. And trust me, I still have nightmares about him as a Bears fan. But he's a little bit older, but I think this is a week where they're going to pound the rock and try and win the football game that way. So I'll go ahead and run with the Redskins, even though that pains me to say. If I could, I'd pick neither one of those teams, but I'm going to go with the Redskins on the road. Surprisingly, I think they'll take that one. The next game, Philadelphia, 3-2. is visiting the also 3-2 Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota rights the ship last week after, pretty garbage game against the Bears. And Kirk Cousins goes crazy on the Giants. Apparently playing the Giants just heals all wounds. It's you play the Giants secondary, you'll be fine. Doesn't matter what happened last week, you'll be fine, bro. And Kirk Cousins threw the ball a whole shit ton. It took Adam Thielen talking mess about him. Stephon Diggs basically saying that he doesn't want to be there anymore. And then, winning cures everything. It's a cliche thing, but it's true. Winning cures everything. Just look at the Bears, you Bears fans. Everyone was ready to jump ship after game 1 and then ready to jump ship after they, barely won against the Broncos. And then you win a couple games and You feel good about yourself. And then, you're thinking, there's no way we're going to lose against the Raiders. And then you lose against the Raiders. So winning cures everything, but sometimes losing has a sobering effect to you. And I think this week this is an interesting matchup specifically for Minnesota because they're at home, and this is a really big game for them because the Bears are off this week, and then you've got the Packers, who I believe are also the Packers. I'm sorry, Packers play the Lions on Monday Night Football, so the Minnesota has a chance here to take a step up, especially if Detroit can win Monday Night Football, because Detroit, I believe, is 2-1 after that tie against the Cardinals in Game 1, and then the Packers are 4-1. So big game for the Vikings, and sorry, I'm a little under the weather, guys. And then yeah, it's also, let's be honest, it's a big game for Philadelphia too, man, because after that, after the pretty slow start, 1-2, you're able to win a couple in a row against the Packers, which was a pretty impressive win, and then against the Jets, which they just ran through the Jets last week because the Jets didn't really have a competent quarterback. Apparently, Luke Falk is better than Colin Kaepernick, and pretty much all of these scrub backups who do nothing and suck are better than Colin Kaepernick somehow. But Matt Castle keeps getting jobs, and all these other guys get jobs. But Guy kneels for injustice, and he's no longer an option for you. Sorry, at the end of the day, right now you've got a pretty nice matchup here for Philly because I think defensively, I think they know what they have to do. They're going to have to stop the run. I don't think anyone's going to be fooled by last week's performance of Kirk Cousins. He is who everyone knows him to be, and I don't think anyone's necessarily super spooked by Kirk Cousins. I think everyone is pretty unanimous about the fact that Kirk Cousins is he's a guy who's never going to really win you the game. He's tricked a couple people into thinking that somehow he is this, he's a savior of a franchise. And I think not, I really think not. So, the big thing for this game though, is that, Minnesota, I think they realize now that they're going to have to pass the ball more. Like, they didn't want to. I don't think they wanted to early in the season. I think they were like, okay, like, oh, well, if we run the ball 40 times, then we might be able to just keep winning games. And, when you see, it's a little bit discouraging, obviously, to lose that game against the Bears, but they bounced right back last week, and then now have a chance to take a home game and again, put themselves in a pretty good position for the division. And with the Bears being off, and one of the other two teams in the division having to lose this week, it puts them in a pretty good position. But I like Philadelphia in this one, mainly just because of the fact that I think Carson Wentz is coming to his own right now. I think they are going to make more of an effort to get Jordan Howard involved and make more of an effort to sort of get more skill players involved. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Deshaun Jackson should be back this week, which could really... Oh, no, I'm sorry. He's out, guys. So, Deshaun, he's a playmaker for them. That doesn't really change my pick, but it is still pretty tough because they're going to be missing a couple cornerbacks, too. They're going to miss Maddox as well as Darby, so two of their best cornerbacks. But when you're playing Minnesota, you might be able to get away with it because you just really have to stop the run. I think the Bears showed if you can stop Dalvin Cook and really, prevent him from going off, you're in a really good position. So I'll take the Eagles in that one, just simply because I think they've got a little bit more of a two-dimensional, team and offense, and I don't necessarily see that with Minnesota. By the way, Minnesota 3-point favorites at home in that one. Next one is the Saints, who, it's crazy. They're 4-1. The Saints are 4-1 without Drew Brees for 3 of those games. So, they're on the road, against the Jaguars, who are 2-3. The Jaguars coming off that game last week. Carolina, they made Carolina look really good. on offense, and I'm not sure they're that good. So I tend to think right now that this Jacksonville defense is probably not as good as we've been giving them credit for, especially in the secondary. I know Jalen Ramsey's probably going to be out this week again. He's questionable, but he's still having back pain. Nobody really wants to believe the guy. Nobody wants to actually believe he's actually injured. I think everyone's just saying, nah, he doesn't want to play for them. He wants to get traded. He doesn't want to. He might be hurt, but he's questionable for the game, so I guess we'll see. And then obviously Drew Brees is going to be out this week again. Sweaty Teddy Bridgewater is going to have a chance. And by the way, 2.5-point favorites are Jacksonville. Gardner Minshew keeps tricking people into thinking that, he is going to be the savior for this franchise. Like, it's crazy that if a guy just comes out and plays half decent, he's your savior now. Like, he doesn't even have to play like Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Watson. It's just like, he plays half decent. He doesn't turn over the ball a ton. He's our future now. And I think it just shows the fickle nature of the quarterback position. It's like, what have you done for me lately? Very, very much a part of that. But this might be a tricky one for New Orleans because I think with New Orleans, man, they play the Cowboys in that really close game where their defense played a tremendous game. But after seeing Dallas last week, I'm starting to think maybe Dallas has some issues right now. Specifically on the offensive side of the ball with Dak getting a little bit too comfortable. Dak. I know Nick played up Dak a lot early in the season, but that schedule was pretty soft. And then now you look at his last two games and you start to have to rethink a little bit about Dak Prescott and that Cowboys team. But yeah, the Saints, a couple weeks ago had that win, and then that win against the Buccaneers, which we talked about last week, which, they abused the Buccaneers secondary and abused the Buccaneers defense and continue to pick on Vernon Hargreaves and some of that secondary and came out with the win at home. This one's going to be on the road though, and I'm not so sure that they're going to be in a position right now where they're going to be able to run the ball a ton, because I think no matter what this Jacksonville defense does, they're still going to be a good run defense because they just got so much firepower up front and in the front seven. So this one might be a tricky one. I actually like if you're a betting person, I would take Jacksonville because I think right now they're 2.5-point favorites. But I think, if they're going to win this game, it's going to be by running the ball a ton with Leonard Fournette and running clock and not really giving the Saints a ton of chances on the defensive side of the ball. So, you know what? I'll go ahead and I'll just pick it. I'll just go ahead and take the Jaguars in this one. I think there's a good chance that this Jaguars defense is going to wake up a little bit. And I think Leonard Fournette's been playing well, and I think Gardner Minshew is doing what he's supposed to do. He's not a savior guy. He's not going to win you the game, but he's efficient. He's making good making good throws, and he's running the plays that are being called for him, and pretty darn effective so far. So I have to say it's pretty impressive because you don't necessarily see 6-round picks come in and do things that often, but still again very impressive for Minshew. Let's not call him the savior of the franchise yet. Like, give him a season and see how he plays it out. But again, I'll take the Jaguars in that one. I don't know how much time I'm going to waste on this one either. We got the 0-5 Bengals facing off against the 3-2 Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore has come back down to earth. Baltimore, everyone is ready to crown them right after the first two games. Ready to crown Lamar Jackson, and then they lose against the Chiefs, and then they lose against the Browns. And last week they face a really undermanned and really not good team in the Steelers, and barely escaped with a 3-point win in overtime. Luckily for them, their defense stepped up late, and I think it was Marlon Humphrey who forced a fumble that really helped them, and they got a 3-point win. They're lucky they're playing the Bengals this week, quite frankly, because they're 10.5-point favorites right now. The Bengals are terrible. The defense is bad. Joe Mixon, poor guy, is going to be stuck there for a few more years. Andy Dalton is Andy Dalton. And, the trend of, let's get a quarterback coach in here from a former, from a team that was, had a good quarterback, that whole trend with Zach Taylor continued. And I think we're starting to see like, okay, I think maybe Cincinnati made the wrong decision there. He did come from the Rams, so, a good culture, but, I'm not so sure about his play calling. I, watched that game against the Steelers on Monday night, and you're kind of looking at it, and you're like, is this guy even a quarterback's coach in the past? Because he really didn't put his quarterback in the best position throughout the game, and especially when you understand that defenses are now keying in on Mixon, you got to be a little bit more creative and figure out ways to get guys open. And I understand they're a little undermanned, but and they're now severely undermanned with no John Ross, and AJ Green apparently is like nowhere near coming back, which gets me to this other point, which is like, teams are like trying their best now to like pressure guys through the media. And so it's like, yeah, AJ will be fine. That's all we heard from Cincinnati. Yeah, he'll be back by week 4, something like that. And like AJ has to come out and say, I don't know where they're getting that from. I'm not close to coming back right now. And, I'm happy that players are not in a position where they have to like entertain that bullshit anymore. I don't want to have AJ Green come out and make himself look bad by saying the team is full of shit. I'm not close to coming back. I'm still hurt. And quite frankly, AJ Green is getting up there right now. And I think he wants another contract after this year. So, whether it's from the Bengals or not, I think he's 100% prepared to walk after this year. So, it's going to be a shit show in Cincinnati for a couple of more years. Lamar, I think this is a chance for Lamar Jackson and this Ravens team to sort of get back on track. If they have to play another close game against this team this week, it might be tough, man. It really might be tough for them to do that because, you've got a relatively good, front seven for Cincinnati, but their secondary is just bad. And, I think what you're going to have to do is run the ball a ton and also just, give Lamar some confidence. Let him throw the ball downfield a little bit more. I know Hollywood Brown is questionable for this game, I think. Yeah, he is. So, if he's healthy, get him involved and just start to really, prepare yourself for the future, because I looked at their schedule early last week. So they are playing the Bengals tomorrow. Then they play the Seahawks the week after that. They play the Patriots the week after that. They have another game against the Bengals after that Patriots game. But then they play the Texans, the Rams, the 49ers, and the Bills to wrap that up. Man, that's a tough stretch for the next 5 or 6 games. And if they don't right the ship right now, they're in a little bit of trouble here, because that Pittsburgh game really worried me last week. Like, Pittsburgh was not in any position to be in that game, and the fact that they almost won it was pretty troubling. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the Ravens, but reluctantly, just only because Cincinnati's so terrible. All right, guys, we're jumping right into some 3 o'clock window games. We've got the aforementioned and undefeated 49ers 4-0 going to LA to play the Rams, who are on a little bit of a skid. The Rams are. They had that game against the Buccaneers that they lost a couple of weeks ago. Big loss where they gave up 55 points. And they had a close loss last week against a division rival. And all of a sudden, you're starting to look at this defense and go, can they stop anyone? Because the 49ers, I will say this, man. The 49ers, they're well coached. If you want to look at a team that's well coached, always prepared, every player knows where they're supposed to be, knows what the play is supposed to, how the play is supposed to run, and good play calling on both sides of the ball. Their defensive coordinator, Salah, he, puts pressure on teams and does a tremendous job of putting his players in positions to make big plays for their defense. And then offensively, Kyle Shanahan, I think the guy's record speaks for itself, that the guy is a prime play caller in this day and age of football. And he's putting Jimmy in positions to, not necessarily make big plays, but I think, when you got Kittle, a guy that can really get you third down, and we saw it last week on the primetime game against Cleveland. Cleveland couldn't stop Kittle on third down. He just kept, it's like 3rd and 10, and he makes an 8-yard catch, and then just like fights for 5 more yards, and gets him a first down. And that's sort of the MO of this team, is to like run the football in different ways. Kind of trick you. I'm gonna run a stretch this play, and I'm running an O trap in this play, and then I'm gonna pitch it on this play, and I'm gonna run it back inside on this. They do a great job of just switching things up. They've got a lot of running backs that they run. Tevin Coleman came back last week and had a long run. We had Matt Breida, who had I think an 80-yard run in the first quarter. And then, Raheem Mostert is a guy who had a couple pretty good games when Tevin Coleman missed a couple games early in the season. So I like the 49ers in this one. I know that the Rams are 3-point favorites. I don't know how. After the last 2 games where you give up 55 to Tampa Bay and then 30-something to Seattle. But quite frankly, I just like San Francisco in general. Nick Bosa, I think he proved that he is a, prime pass rusher in this league. I was a little bit skeptical about whether or not it was going to translate because at Ohio State, first of all, he had that huge thing at Ohio State where he sat out and, he didn't want to play. And I actually was on his side about that thing. I don't think he should have jeopardized his career to play for free for some program that doesn't give a shit about him and that will, sweep him to the side next year. So I don't think he had any allegiance or he didn't owe anything to Ohio State in that situation. But I was still skeptical about him because you were starting to see some some guys being overpowered. I think guys who run finesse sort of pass rushing stuff in college start to get overpowered, and he's not being overpowered right now. I know that Cleveland's offensive line is not exactly the best in the league, but he made them look terrible last week. They've got like 5 first-round picks on that defensive line right now. They've got linebackers who can fly, and they've also got a secondary that's pretty sound. I don't think Richard Sherman is like Legion of Boom Richard Sherman, but I think he's still one of the better cornerbacks in this league when it comes to coverage. And I also think right now San Francisco does enough to win games. Even last week on Monday Night Football, Robbie Gould missed kicks, but they were able to overcome that stuff. Like they had a couple chances to sort of let the lead slip or give Cleveland some momentum, and they just keep finding ways to snatch it back. And I think this is going to be one where we're going to see what the Rams are made of, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Because listen, they've already lost to Seattle once. And if you lose to the 49ers this week, that puts you in a really tough position. I mean, I know it's early in the season, guys. We're in week 6 right now, but the season is really made in the first 10 weeks. The first 10 weeks have a lot to do with how your team is going to do in the season. And the first 10 weeks, we're in week 6 now. And if St. Louis, I always call them St. Louis at least once a show. If the Rams, LA, cannot win this game, it's going to put them in a tough position where they're going to have to basically win out in the division, which is tough. I know the Cardinals are not very good, but, I think the Cardinals will surprise some people later on in the season. I think they're going to figure it out. I think they have figured it out to a certain extent, and we'll talk about their performance last week, and I think I like them really very much in this week's game. I think they play the Falcons, so so I'm going to go with 49ers in that game. I know that the Rams are favorites and they're at home, but I don't really trust them, and I just think right now that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to come out and win in the game with smart play and not turning over the ball. And if he can do that, this 49ers team is going to be good and they'll stay undefeated. All right, guys. Man, what a coinkydink. We just talked about the Cardinals, and oddly enough, we've got this Cardinals game next. It's the 1-4 Atlanta Falcons visiting the 1-3-1 Cardinals. The Cardinals got their first win last week against Cincinnati. Awesome. Good for them. I've got Kyler Murray in a couple of leagues, or in one of my leagues. Actually, Yeah, one of my leagues. I'm sorry. He's actually, it's pretty crazy. You start to look at some of the fantasy numbers. I want to say that he is one of the more consistent fantasy quarterbacks in the league this whole year. I think people are undervaluing him a lot because they look at the team overall not doing so well, and then they also look at some of the shortcomings of the offense and injuries and stuff like that, and they think, oh man, this there's no way that this guy's going to be able to pull this thing out in the first year, and he has somehow. I mean, he used his feet a lot more against Cincinnati last week. Probably a lot more than they want him to, too, because I think at the end of the day, they would prefer that Kyler doesn't do too much with his feet, except like shuffling out of bounds for like an 8-yard gain every once in a while. But I think, a guy who's like 5'10", 5'11", as small as him, against, even an NFL safety coming up and hitting you hard, it's a tough lick to take. So, but yeah, the Atlanta Falcons are going to be visiting Arizona to be to get another, hopefully, get a win and salvage this season and maybe save Dan Quinn's job. But I don't see it happening. By the way, Atlanta is somehow 2.5-point favorites in this one. Atlanta's offense, I talked about it earlier in the show. You look at their numbers, you're like, oh, they're not that bad. Well, they are bad. If you've been watching the games, they are bad. They're just able to kind of scrounge up a touchdown or two here or there. They had another garbage touchdown late in the game last week when they were clearly going to lose the game. But, they had a long touchdown to Calvin Ridley. It saved me in one of my fantasy leagues, so thank you. But still, it's just a tricky thing to look at numbers and say, yeah, they're going to do okay. I think people are underestimating the Cardinals right now. I think the Cardinals have, they've got a defense that has a lot of veterans on it. They brought in, a lot of people were surprised when they brought in Terrell Suggs and made a couple more veteran signings because they're like, oh, this team is like transitioning and has a new head coach and is just trying to find their footing in the league. Why would they do this? And I think the easy answer, quite frankly, is that you've got a team that has the offensive output that they think is going to be able to win football games in this league, as long as the defense can sort of create some turnovers every now and then, and also give the ball back to this offense because they run a lot of plays, and they also say what you want about this sort of spread out sort of, gunning offense. They've had some pretty good success with it in some games, even the games that they've lost. So I know David Johnson's questionable this week, and people are saying he's going to play. He's important to that offense because when people key in on him, it makes it easier for Kyler. And I think now if he misses the game, we might be looking at a tough one here. But if David Johnson plays, I like Arizona in this one. But I'm never going to really be surprised that Atlanta will pull out a game here or there, even against that Eagles team where, the Eagles weren't looking that great, and I think Atlanta, stayed in the game, and then that one Julio touchdown really helped them. So, I think Atlanta is somehow going to stay, relevant, but I just don't see it for me right now, guys. Just going to take a quick break to tell you a little bit about Local Level Podcast. It's one of our sister podcasts on this network, Pod River Network, along with Boss to Boss and us, Mack and Black. We're going to have Local Level Podcast, which is a new local and small business show focused on small business owners and just trying to put a spotlight onto some lesser seen people and factions, and that's just sort of what we want to do, and I love the idea, and I think you guys are gonna love it too. So check out Local Level Podcast. I believe locallevelshow.com is the website. It does come on every Friday. And again, it's a part of our network, Pod River Network. Do us a favor. Check out podriver.com. Again, you'll see shows for Boss to Boss. Mira Wieslow, our buddy, he does a tremendous job on Boss to Boss every week. Really interesting guests, really cool stuff, and really, some of the conversations he has with people really thought provoking, and just a really overall cool concept for Miro. So I love what they're doing over there at Boss to Boss, and I'm very happy to be me and Nick are very happy to be a part of Pod River, and again, check out Local Level Podcast, guys, because again, really good opportunity for you guys to check out some pretty interesting content that is focused more locally and more on the small business side, which is really cool. You guys can check out one of the previous episodes with Mike from Reps. Reps is the bar and restaurant that we went to last week and did our live show at. Tremendous atmosphere, awesome place, cool decor. The food was tremendous. I'll be honest with you. I'm not, people know me. I'm not shy to say something sucks or I think that's okay, but I'm that guy. I'm kind of a dickhead when it comes to that. I'm okay with saying something's not as good as I thought it was, but man, the wings there were tremendous. I ended up having a burger that was awesome. They had, onion strings and fries were tremendous. It was really good. Cheap drink specials. So really, really good place. So check out Reps, guys. But yeah, Mike, the owner of Reps, who goes back with my buddy Nick, and he's a really nice guy. Did an episode of Local Level. So check that out, guys. Again, it's Local Level Podcast. LocalLevelShow.com is the website. And then, again, Pod River Media is the network, guys, that we are on. And that includes Local Level, us, Mack and Black, and then Boss to Boss with Miro Wieslow. So check out all three of those. Add them to your playlist, please. All right, guys, let's wrap up the last few football games. And then I'm going to jump into some UFC because I've got a lot to talk about on UFC. Both from last week's fights, and then we've got some fights that are going on tonight. Pretty enticing card tonight, even though it's like sort of flying under the radar right now. We'll go through some of the card tonight because I really like some of those fights that should be happening tonight. But yeah, let's wrap up with the last few 3 o'clock games, and then we'll talk some more about the Monday Night Football game, and then we'll jump right into the UFC. All right, guys. Next 3 o'clock window game, we got the 2-3 Titans coming off of a pretty impressive couple weeks. I'll be honest with you. I didn't think they would be in that game against the Bills last week. I thought the Bills were going to overpower the offense, which they did. They did overpower that offense last week, but that defense did a tremendous job for Tennessee in keeping the Bills. I know the Bills are not exactly, an offensive powerhouse, but I still thought it was pretty impressive that they were able to stop them on many occasions. And the Bills right now a little shorthanded, with injuries and stuff like that. But I thought it was impressive that they were in that game. They were face off against the 1-4 Denver Broncos, who finally got their first win last week against the lowly Chargers, who, man, we've got to talk about them. Speaking of soul searching, that team has some soul searching to do right now, so we'll talk about that. But yeah, the Broncos are home favorites for this one, 1.5-point favorites. I'm surprised by that, honestly. I think Tennessee to me has looked like the better team this year, and I think they're going to establish the run against this Denver team. Denver finally was able to get turnovers, sacks, stuff like that, momentum changers for their defense last week. And I'd be interested to see if they're able to do it this week, because I think you're going to see a lot of Derrick Henry in this game, a lot of just sort of trying to push the ball forward and just trying to really win this game on the ground, both stopping the run and running, because Phillip Lindsay, he's made them tick, to be honest, man. He's carried the ball. A good amount, but he's been splitting carries with Freeman, their backup. But I think 327 yards in 5 games. That's not even accounting 4 games where they've been behind, pretty much the majority of the game. So I think Denver's in a spot right now where they can get their second win, but I quite frankly like Tennessee in this game. I think Marcus Mariota is going to just try and not lose them the game, and then they're going to run a ton of stuff for Derrick Henry, and I think Tennessee's defense impressed me last week. Again, the Bills are not exactly world burners, but they did the same thing against the Falcons, who tend to try and creep up on you on the offensive side of the ball. And, let's not forget that I think, this team has given up 13 points to the Browns, 19 points to the Colts, 20 points to the Jaguars, 10 points against the Falcons, and then 7 points against, or 14 points against the Bills. To me, man, this defense is not as bad as I thought it was. And as long as they can run the ball a lot and control clock and not give too much momentum back to the Broncos with that stuff, with like turnovers and stuff like that. I like the Titans in this game on the road, picking a lot of road teams this week. And then let's just jump in right into the next game. Pretty intriguing game. Dallas is 3-2 after 2 straight losses. Perfect opportunity to bounce back against the winless Jets, who... Let me check on this. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we should see Sam Darnold back this week. If it's not a guarantee, then it's at least a game time decision, I believe. Let me check on that, because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth about that, because I do remember hearing that, they were going to take it relatively slow with him, but, at the same time, it's like, how slow can you take it your own for? And, your team really can't do much without the guy. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to see him back this week. Dallas, man, tough losses the last couple of weeks for Dallas. Even that loss against the Packers last week was, it showed that this defense really, we might have been sort of overrating this defense a little bit, because they gave up 34 points against the Packers. Let's be honest, the defense was, not that bad against the New Orleans, but the week before. But man, Dak Prescott was not as good as you would expect him to be last week against the Packers, and quite frankly, that game for Ezekiel Elliott was pretty disappointing too. He only had, I think, 12 carries in that game. Most of it had to do with them being behind the whole game. So Dak had 3 interceptions last week. You can't win games when your quarterback throws 3 interceptions. But again, perfect bounce back opportunity for them against this Jets team, which, the Jets right now are 7-point dogs at home, but I think it should be a little bit more, because their defense has, without C.J. Mosley, their defense has been absolutely horrendous. But I think they get Mosley back this week. I say that every week because, I always see that he's on the injury report, but sorry, guys, I can't really even see the injury report on this phone because my phone's about to die. But yeah, I think it doesn't really even matter if CJ's going to play or not. I think the Cowboys will find a way to get right. They're expect to see Ezekiel Elliott run the ball a ton this week, and expect to see Dak Prescott try and put himself in a position to have a big game without turning over the ball. And defensively, all they really have to do is stop Le'Veon Bell, and I think they should be okay. Sunday night this week is an interesting game between two teams who have disappointed so far this season. And we've got the 1-4 Pittsburgh Steelers on their third-string quarterback now, an undrafted rookie, going to L.A. to face the Chargers, who are 2-3 right now, and not the best last couple of games for the Chargers. They've lost 3 of 4, they lost that close game against the Lions a couple weeks ago on the road, and then they lose at home against the Texans the week after that, and then last week against the Broncos. And then they beat up the Dolphins in between that. But last week against the Charger or the Broncos, gave up big plays to Phillip Lindsay, and defensively, they let Joe Flacco beat them multiple times. Right now, I think the Chargers are 6.5-point favorites. I'm surprised it's not more. Obviously, Mason Rudolph, horrific hit. I hope he's okay. The league and the Pittsburgh Steelers should be embarrassed by the way that they handled that situation. You let a guy who just got knocked out UFC style. I mean, that was UFC style. It was like he got hit right here, and it was almost as if like he just took somebody was wearing a helmet as a glove and just went and just hit him, and he got knocked out. And they tried to bring the cart out, and the cart was broken. Now, in the past in the league, they would just like bring guys out to. I think I've seen that before, where they just have guys out, carry out a stretcher. They let this guy get up and walk off on his own, and he was, in this head, the look on his face was just like of a guy who's like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, why, and that's embarrassing. You've got a guy who might have a neck injury. I know that they saw the nature of the play and knew that it was clearly a concussion, but you don't know. The whole reason why they bring out the stretchers and why they bring out these carts is for precautionary reasons, because if his neck got messed up, if his spine got messed up, that could be a career thing, not even a career, a life, life-affecting thing. So, not necessarily happy about the way that was handled by the Pittsburgh Steelers, but, apparently he is, he's in the league protocol right now for the concussion. He's out this week. It's going to be, I believe his last name is Hodges. I'm not exactly sure who the guy is exactly. Devlin Hodges is the name of the new Steelers quarterback. Again, a third string guy, a guy who is undrafted. And the Chargers are at home right now. I like the Chargers in this game. I think there's another, like we talked about, the opportunity to bounce back, another amazing opportunity for them to bounce back here and put themselves in a position where, they can, they can move forward, because again, they're 2-3 right now, getting themselves to 3-3 in a division where, right now the Chargers, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to catch the Chiefs, but, people forget the Raiders are 3-2 right now. After that win against the Bears last week, they're 3-2. So, the Raiders are in a tremendous position right now, even, for the division. And I think in order for the Chargers to be part of that conversation, they've got to win this week, man. I expect a big week out of Austin Eckler, and even to a certain extent, Melvin Gordon. I think they're going to get him more involved. He was playing last week, but not a ton of involvement. And quite frankly, I think Austin Eckler had 15 catches out of the backfield. They're really, really banged up on the wide receiver side right now. So I expect big games out of Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, some of their other position guys, because quite frankly, I think Pittsburgh right now is undermanned on defense, and their offense is in major trouble right now because James Conner, I think Jalen Samuels is out of this game now, so they're going to be relying on like Benny Snell to back up James Conner. Poor James Conner, he's going to be in trouble the rest of the season because teams are just not going to let him do much. Part of the reason why James Conner had such a tremendous, season last year, you have to admit, is AB and Ben Roethlisberger and Juju and, the ability for them to, get the ball downfield, and the focus that teams put on their passing game made things so easy for him. And now this year, it's almost the opposite. It's almost as if, he has to do it by himself. I would expect, he didn't have one target last week, James Conner. I would expect that to change. So, fantasy-wise, I don't necessarily see him as like a guy that you sit. I think you automatically start him now, but also, he has to do stuff in the passing game. Like, you're going to have to get him involved out of the backfield, screen passes, and make him run routes out of the backfield, because you're going to have to get creative now, because Devlin Hodges is not going to be a guy that's going to beat you. And they were already trying to do that creative shit with the Wildcat and everything like that. And now Jalen Samuels is out, so I don't know how well they're going to be able to run that. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I like the Chargers in that one, especially on primetime at home against an undrafted rookie quarterback. I think the Chargers will take that one pretty easily. And then, I don't even want to mention these two teams on Monday night. The Detroit Lions, God, 2-1-1, looking pretty good so far this season. I guess Green Bay Packers, who cares? Yeah, they're 4-1. They look pretty good too after that win last week. They came back down to earth, against that Eagles team, and I think getting kicked in the face by that Eagles team really woke this team up. And Aaron Jones went off last week against the Cowboys, and Aaron had himself a pretty good game, and that defense had a pretty good game too. Is the defense as good as they showed in the first 3 weeks? No, but I think that defense is pretty good. The Packers are, and I would say the same thing about the Lions too. The Lions, man. They had a bye week last week, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they had a bye week last week, and they didn't have a chance to get much momentum after, a 2-1 start. But now they have that shot to win this game and, move to 3-1 and put themselves in a position. This is going to be a tough division no matter what. The Bears, I don't imagine, are going to be going away anytime soon. They're out. They're on bye this week, but I don't see them going away in the division. And quite frankly, say what you want about the Vikings, but I don't see them going away either because they have the skill position players on the offensive side of the ball, and defensively they do pretty well for themselves. So I wouldn't necessarily count them out. So it's going to be a tough division game here. I would say that right now the Packers should be the favorites. Yeah, they're 4-point favorites right now. The Packers are in Vegas. But Detroit, listen, Detroit's an interesting team. I love Kerryon Johnson. I love, I love that Matthew Stafford sort of, he marches to the beat of his own drummer. He's a guy who, he's set some records for like how many times he's passed the ball over the last few seasons, and I think a lot of people have argued that that's what part of the downfall of the Lions teams is that they rely too much on him to throw the ball 50 times a game. Now with Kerryon Johnson, he's a legitimate number one running back and a guy who can be a bell cow running back in this league, and I think they're going to treat him as that soon. They actually are already to a certain extent, relying on him, especially they cut C.J. Anderson after, going out of their way to sign him over the offseason. So clearly they like where they're at with Kerryon right now. But, on the road, on Monday night, I think it's going to be cold if I'm not mistaken. So, this might be a tough one. I like the Packers in this game. I think the Packers right now, what they've done with Aaron Jones, especially even with like Jamal Williams out, has been tremendous. And then they won that game last week without Davante Adams, and without really being too crazy effective, throwing the ball. It was just all Aaron Jones last week, which was tremendous. I think Davante Adams is going to be out this week for one more week. Oh, he's questionable. Well, the reason why I mentioned the whole A.J. Green thing earlier was because people were ready to say that Davante Adams was ready to go, and I just flipped him in one of my leagues, that I'm doing terribly in for four lottery tickets, four lottery ticket players, because I don't necessarily think that the team is being honest about the severity of his injury. Listen, dude, if you can't put your shoe on, after an injury happened because it hurts so much, it's not a minor injury. That's a major thing. And I think what happened was Davante got hurt, and then people saw him sort of being optimistic afterwards, and then the team put out some reports that he should be fine, and that it was a relatively minor injury. And then he's been having to almost defend himself all week in the press and basically say, listen, he didn't. I don't think he practiced at all on Thursday. I think he basically was in street clothes. Maybe just because they're playing on Monday night. So technically Wednesdays are usually rest days, or, days where you give some guys some time off because you're playing on Sunday, but Thursday, because they're playing on Monday night, Thursday would serve as that. So I think he practiced in a limited capacity yesterday. But I still like the Packers either way because I think that defense is good. And again, maybe not as good as we saw them be in the first couple of games, but, I talked some shit about Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith, but I think I've said this about teams in the past. Don't worry about what people say. Just if you feel like these guys are going to be effective in your system, they're going to be guys who can really help you out, then fuck what anyone says. Go out and, spend the money and do what you have to do. And, again, Adrian Amos and Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith, these are guys that were not like world beaters on their old teams, but now they've come in and they've, fit in really nicely, and they have a chance now to go 5-1 to start the season, which is pretty tremendous considering that, right now, the Vikings have scuffled a little bit. The Lions didn't have the best start, and then the Bears have, who a lot of people thought the Bears were like going to run away with this division. I didn't think so, but a lot of people were like ready to crown them, after game one and or before game one, and then after game one happened, they're like, okay, maybe we should reconsider this. So, but yeah, I like the Packers in that game just simply because you're gonna have the home advantage, and I think their defense is gonna be able to stop Matthew Stafford more often than he's able to beat them. So, guys, let's just get into our UFC segment. Why not? At this point, I don't get to talk a ton of UFC on this thing because most of the time either like we miss the card, or there's just circumstances that don't allow us to really capitalize on talking a lot of UFC. But we got that live the live podcast last week at Reps, which was tremendous. We got to give away a couple of tickets. So congrats to the gentleman who won those tickets for the Giants-Bears game next month. He was a really nice guy, and I hope he enjoys it. He's a White Sox fan, so that's all I really need. That's all I really need to give away the tickets. Is you're a White Sox fan, you're good to go. But yeah, guys, let's jump into some UFC because I got a lot to talk about, including Israel Adesanya. I want to talk about Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and Michelle Waterson is tonight, and then that card is pretty dope. So I want to go through that a little bit with you guys, but I want to talk about our sponsor for every single UFC segment is brought to you by Nux 3-in-1 Refresher Spray, guys. When you're running around on a hot day and feel sweaty and sticky and don't have time to take a shower or don't have a change of clothes, what do you do? Well, if you've ever played sports, if you really anything that makes you sweat, any sort of physical activity, you know the feeling. It is gross. It's the chafing, the itching, the stinking, and just pretty much the overall nasty stuff that comes from being out on a hot day or even just sweaty. I know there's baby powder, there's like all sorts of like halfway solutions, body sprays that are, never really do the job, but, always tend to, stick on when it's like 6 hours later and you kind of smell it. You smell like a tinge of sweat and a tinge of that spray. It's never really good either way, but there is a solution finally, guys. It's Nux 3-in-1 Refresher Spray. It is made to replace all the other halfway solutions on the market. Nux is a moisture-absorbing spray that is designed specifically for dudes. That is because it's a little bit difficult to handle the undergarment area, the balls, the undercarriage. So again, armpits, clothing, sports pads, athletic equipment, boxing gloves, helmets, anything that gets nasty during activity. Nux 3-in-1 has you covered, guys. Nux 3-in-1 Refresher Spray has no aluminum ingredients and is tested to be safe and effective all over the body. It comes scented and unscented. The scented is a zoo spray. I just put some on myself earlier today, and it smells tremendous. And I usually have, I have gray on, so you could usually see my sweat stains. You can't, and that's because of Nux 3-in-1. Again, guys, tested to be safe and effective all over the body. And if you just want to find out more, guys, do us a huge favor. Look them up on Facebook, the My Nux 3-in-1 Refresher Spray page on Facebook, and then also mynux.com, myknucks.com is the website. Check them out. Shout out to Nux Nick. Shout out to Nux 3-in-1 Refresher Spray. Thank you so much for your continued support of the podcast. And guys, again, mynux.com, myknucks.com. So as I mentioned to you guys last week, Nick and I had a tremendous time at Reps. It was a tremendous podcast. We got a lot of stuff in. And then one thing that I was really happy that we were able to do was I brought my iPad and we were able to watch the Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker. One of the biggest event in UFC history. They confirmed it. I think it was 55,000, new record for an audience for the UFC, and pretty surprising to see that was the record, because I thought I saw that they were in bigger arenas, but nevertheless, 55K in New Zealand is crazy. It was apparently the biggest sporting event that's ever happened in New Zealand. I think it's called Oceanic, so New Zealand, Australia, that area, in their history. Both Adesanya and Whittaker are local. I think Adesanya is New Zealand, and I think Whittaker is from Australia. I'm not sure. They might both be from New Zealand. But, a lot of people were talking shit about Adesanya before this fight. Listen, I'm a huge fan. That going back to his kickboxing days when I saw him on a couple of Joe Rogan podcasts and I looked up some highlights, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's crazy. And I just loved his style and his nickname, the Last Style Bender. And, his interviews he's one of the smartest guys, like witty and personality wise, just like, he is the mold. Like he's the guy that you would base the perfect, UFC fighter with, the wit, the personality, but then also when he gets into that octagon, he proves it. And a lot of people, including the vast majority of the crowd, didn't want Adesanya to win. Whitaker is somewhat of a cult favorite in that area. I get it. Whitaker, he's had some tremendous fights in the past, and has done a tremendous job in his career. But his last 2 fights against a 45-year-old, I think, Yoel Romero, I think a lot of people cooled down on Whitaker a little bit, even after he won those fights, because he didn't look all that great. And I think, everyone sort of knows the MO for Romero. And Romero, I think he had a case in both of those fights that he might have won that fight. It's kind of crazy to say that because he didn't, but I do believe that. I think he had a real legitimate shot at winning the decisions in both of those fights, but never did. But yeah, there's a lot of hate for Adesanya. People don't really like Adesanya. I hate to be this guy, partly because it's like, here's this brash black guy who, he's sort of, talking shit on everyone. And really, he came out and did a dance number. He did a full-on crump dance number where he was doing flips and all sorts of crazy stuff with 3 of his buddies. And there's a lot of people who have bad takes on this. One of the bad takes is, oh my God, like, you're going to do a dance number before your fight. You're not a real fighter and this and this and that. And I have the complete opposite viewpoint. My viewpoint is like, dude, this dude just stuck his neck out. Like, listen, Israel Adesanya is a smart guy. He knows what would happen to him in the media, all the memes that would come about after he did that dance number and then loses. It's like a career suicide type move. And I think he did it on purpose. I think what he did was just show, like, I'm playing with you idiots. Like, you guys really don't understand that I am the best and I don't care. And when he got into the octagon to a shower of boos, by the way, from his home crowd, a lot of that has to do with them loving Whitaker so much. But then the fight starts and Whitaker does what is technically in the scouting report when you're fighting Adesanya, which is the guy has a huge reach advantage. The guy is dynamic with his feet, and can throw leg kicks to every corner of your body, but can also, has the reach to basically pick you apart with a jab from far away. So Whitaker tried to close some of that space. Lots of short explosions to try and capitalize on the spacing and just get real close to Adesanya and make sure that his reach advantage wasn't too much. And then the whole first round, me and Nick and actually Mike and Steve were at reps and watching this together. And I think I kept looking at Nick and saying, he's playing exactly into what Adesanya wants him to do, which is just this rushing approach of, I've got to get to him first. Because I think a lot of, that fight against Kelvin Gastelum that Stylebender had, people were ready to write him off because Gastelum was just so effective, striking-wise. We'd never seen anybody with that disadvantage of reach, touch Adesanya in that way, and at some points wobble Adesanya. At some points, put him on the mat. Briefly. It's. I think Whitaker came in thinking I can do that, and Gastelum said it after the fight. He said, I think Whitaker tried to do what I did, but I don't think he realized that he's not as good as me. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I see what he's saying. I see that, he did see Whitaker try and take his game plan and move forward with it, but wasn't able to see the results. And the first round is happening, and Whitaker is looking pretty good, honestly. Whitaker is moving in, and he's getting hit, but he's still in the game. I think he was doing his best. job to conserve energy, but also, use those short explosions to try and close space. And it didn't work that well. And what ended up happening is Adesanya essentially put him out in the first round, at the end of the first round, last 10 seconds. And the clock or the horn sounded and the round was over, and he was saved by the bell, Whitaker. And Whitaker got up and he was wobbly and he was out. Like if it was another 3 more seconds in that first round, it would have been a first round knockout for Adesanya. And then Adesanya came out in the second round and knew exactly what he was going to do. He is a guy who, the mental aspect of his game is so impressive. And, he said something about coming out in that last round against Gastelum and essentially saying, like, I'm ready to die. Like, that's where he was in his mindset. Like, I'm on death's door right now, and I will die in this octagon to beat Kelvin Gastelum. And he puts out Gastelum, and we saw his face. We saw the memes and of everything of his face after that fight. But after this Whitaker fight, which again he came out in the second round and he closed him down in the second round. Used kicks effectively, and then just close the space and beat Whitaker down. Credit to Whitaker for staying in the game, but also to a certain extent, I was rubbed a little bit the wrong way with some of the post-fight talk of him. I love fighters who are raw with their emotions and don't mind saying exactly how they feel, especially after losses. Like, okay, after wins, it's easy to say how you feel. But after losses, I like to see you do some reflecting. I like to see you have some honest discourse with yourself and with others. And I don't think Whitaker did that. I think Whitaker was like, well, we're both very powerful fighters, and he was the best this guy this week or this tonight. But I think that's what happens when you try and throw with a guy and da da da. I'd like to see him come out and say, yeah, I could have been better, because he could have been better. And I think he rushed in a lot, wasn't as composed as he needed to be. And quite frankly, I didn't see that championship sort of thought process that he had going in against even like Yoel Romero. So yeah, I was disappointed to see him a little bit kind of come out after the fight and try and take some credit away from Adesanya. And Israel, after the fight, so Paulo Costa, who I've talked about in the past, he's the one who fought Yoel Romero last, and Paulo Costa's got the body of a Greek god, and so many meat-headed casual fans love this guy, and Adesanya is such a G. He's just like, I want to see this dude who looks like a Greek god, who everyone in the world loves so much because he looks like a meat-headed, just ripped. Every crevice of his body just has like, this definition that just like, probably took hours and hours of sculpting, and Adesanya just said, I want to beat this guy just to prove that this skinny, lanky, long sort of, black dude can beat up on this, this god of a man, and this powerhouse of a body, and that it doesn't really take that strength. Costa's very explosive, but he also expends a lot of energy. I mean, we saw it in that Yoel Romero fight. He expends a lot of energy using his body, and part of the downfall, I'm not exactly a guy who's looped into the MMA community. I've never really done the fighting things myself with the gloves on, but part of what everyone says about someone with this jacked body is that it's really hard to utilize that in a, possible 15 to 25 minute fight. Because when you look at it in the perspective of, yeah, you're jacked, but when you don't have your hands on me, how well can you use that muscle? So I think Adesanya is playing it coy a little bit right now. I don't think he's exactly coming out and saying that Paulo Costa fight is going to happen, but I think the thought process right now is that Costa is next up. And quite frankly, a lot of people, including me, would like to see that fight because, I think Costa is a nice sort of step up for Israel. Israel's got a lot of UFC left in him. He's gonna. I know that the whole John Jones thing is ramping up, that he's gonna move up to light heavyweight, and possibly fight John Jones. I said it in last week's show. I think he's still a little light in the ass for that. I'd like to see him maybe do a couple more fights at middleweight, just to see, what type of competition is going to really give him troubles or not give him troubles. But quite frankly, I like his mindset too. I loved Israel's mindset after the fight, which was, he won the interim title against Gastelum because he was covering for Whitaker, and last week's fight was for the undisputed title. Now he is the undisputed champion. He's got to go out and defend it a couple times. So the division is kind of stacked up right now. I would like to see Israel sort of have a little bit more invested into this current weight class before I see him jump to light heavyweight. So don't get me wrong. I would love to see that John Jones fight against Adesanya. I think it would be a pretty awesome fight. But quite frankly, I think Adesanya does need to defend a couple more times, and I'd like to see him, move forward with a little bit more. I think he's going for like the pound for pound, the title right now. Everyone wants to be the pound for pound guy, but the way that Adesanya won that fight last week, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, I think he has a chance to be the greatest of all time, pound for pound. Now, Khabib is still certainly in that conversation. I think John Jones is certainly still in that conversation. But I think Khabib has like 5 fights in him left, max. Like, I think Khabib said he's got 3, which I wouldn't necessarily say that because he's still relatively young and he's undefeated. But, Khabib is going to fight more than likely Tony Ferguson next. Tony certainly deserves it. We'll see if Tony gets that call, but I think all signs are pointing toward Tony Ferguson versus Khabib. I would like to see Khabib maybe fight like 3 or 4 more times, but I don't necessarily see that to be a guarantee. Maybe he'll do. I know that GSP has been in talks right now with Khabib, or Khabib has been talking about GSP, and GSP has been talking about Khabib. I know that the UFC is probably going to try and push a Conor and a Khabib fight, especially if Conor can win his next fight, which is not scheduled quite yet. But I know people are talking. There's a lot of talk. He pulled out of the Donald Cerrone, the Cowboy Cerrone fight. I wouldn't say he pulled out of it. I think Cerrone wanted it. Conor didn't. But I see a lot of fights for Conor, including like a Dustin Poirier. I think would be a nice fight for him to prove that he's up for it. Because Conor gets overpraised in some aspects and he gets underpraised in other aspects. I think it's overpraised because of his personality and just the dynamic way that he talks and able to promote fights. But as a UFC fighter, people are starting to see through this guy. Like, you haven't been in the octagon in a while since that Khabib fight. Even before the Khabib fight, you did the whole Mayweather thing, and there was a Dolly incident, and then now he's going to court for punching an old man and sucker punching an old man. It's just. I'd like to see him come back and fight before we start to talk about him as a legitimate contender anymore. But yeah, to go back to my point, Israel, I think right now is going for that pound for pound thought process, because I think he realizes like, okay, now I'm in a position where in another 4 or 5 fights, if I keep dominating like this, I might be in the pound for pound discussion, especially because John Jones didn't look tremendous against Thiago Santos. I'm not sure if that Cormier fight happens, especially because Cormier says the rematch against Stipe would be his last fight. To me, man, that's a tough. I get it. I'm not going to be the guy that goes to Cormier and say, how could you walk away after not being able to beat the only guy, that you haven't been able to beat, which is John Jones. But maybe he just can't beat John. Maybe it's just one of those things where he's like, I can't beat the guy. I'm going to come back and maybe beat Stipe like I did the first time around. But apparently, if he comes and fights Stipe, it's over for him. So John is in an interesting position in a way, because he's going to be looked at a lot more. He's going to be scrutinized a lot more over the next couple of years, because he had a large stretch over the last couple of years where he didn't fight, whether it be for personal issues or injuries or whatever it may be. Excuse me. So yeah, Israel right now, if he can get through the next couple of fights, defend his title, and then beat Jon Jones, even if Khabib is undefeated at that point, if Khabib is done in another year or two, if he's done, and Adesanya beats Jones, man, that's a really, really tough thing to deny, to say that this guy isn't the best of all time after beating what people have unanimously thought of as the best pound-for-pound fighter in UFC history, in Jon Jones, who should be undefeated but isn't because of a technicality. So Adesanya has a special, chance to do something that, quite frankly, a guy like him has never done. So we'll see. But I really do see him as a contender for possibly the greatest UFC fighter of all time, pound for pound. And he's got a long way to go. Don't get me wrong. The guy, I think he's only got 5 fights in the UFC, formerly a kickboxing champion, Muay Thai champion. But he's got a chance, I think, to really cement himself as a contender, not only in the division, but also, again, light heavyweight might be an option for him. And I think if he beats Jon Jones, man, we might be talking about one of the best fighters of all time. Guys, we've got a fight card tonight. It is a UFC fight night, so it should be on ESPN+. Some very interesting fights on this one. The undercards are pretty underwhelming. I mean, Marvin Vettori versus Andrew Sanchez on the undercard. You got Marlon Vera versus a new kid, Andrew Ewell. He looks pretty good. I saw him in one of the undercards a couple of months ago. Davison Figueiredo's 16-1 flyweight against Tim Elliott. That should be a good fight. And then some of the ones on the closer to the top of the card, Eric Anders, former Alabama football player, is going to face Gerald Mearshart, who is I believe he's from Duke Rufus. So he is a guy up in Milwaukee training. Luis Pena. My God, this guy, Luis Pena, I believe he's called Violent Bob Ross. I love him on social media, and I love his shtick. So Violent Bob Ross facing Matt Frivola. That's going to be a dope-ass fight in the lightweight division. I really like Luis Pena, the Violent Bob Ross in that one. Mackenzie Dern. 4 months after having a baby, I was hoping she would have my baby, but apparently that's off the table now that she's had a baby with another man. But Mackenzie Dern, 4 months after having a child, is going to be fighting Amanda Ribas in a women's strawweight match tonight. 7-0 is Dern, who is a grappling, I wouldn't even say grappling, jiu-jitsu wizard, who transferred her skills to the MMA stuff a couple years ago. Her dad is, I think, Megaton Diaz, so he's a big jiu-jitsu guy down in Brazil, and just actually worldwide, because people forget jiu-jitsu right now. It's hot in the streets. I think people see the UFC and the success and they say, oh, it's only the fighting, but dude, some of these jiu-jitsu tournaments and other stuff that's going on, man, are really ginormous, and jiu-jitsu is a big industry. So, Mackenzie Dern face Amanda Ribas. That's going to be an interesting one. I would probably take Dern, but again, 4 months after you have a child come out of you, that might be tough. So, and then the next couple of fights, the top 3 fights on this card are all really interesting. Nico Price and James Vick are going to face off in a welterweight battle. James Vick coming off of a loss, and I believe Nico Price coming off a loss as well. I'll have to check on that, but yeah, this is an interesting one because both are sort of in the same bracket right now in the welterweight side of things, and I think Vick was on his way up after a couple of wins and sort of dropped down, and same thing for Price. So this is going to be an interesting one, and then Crone Gracie. A featherweight is going to face Cub Swanson, another guy who's lost a couple in a row and has had sort of some issues since those losses. He was ready to fight for the featherweight title at some point, and again, Cub sort of has had a couple of losses. Crone Gracie is the son of Rickson Gracie. What he is widely considered to be the greatest jiu-jitsu and some would say MMA guy in the history of fighting. He's certainly the most respected Gracie, and the Gracie family is the most respected of all of the families of jiu-jitsu. And Rickson is by far the guy. And this kid, Crone Gracie, is his son. he does these crazy like breathing techniques where his you could see like his rib cage, you could see like his organs inside, and just like the breathing control and the absolute dominance that Kron Gracie has done in other leagues, and then now and now in his last couple of fights in UFC. Very interesting fight. It's gonna be I think it's gonna be the biggest test of Kron's career. But I love Kron because his jiu-jitsu is suffocating. It is one of those things where, like, you're not going to really be able... If he gets you on the ground, if he gets his arms around you, you're probably done. So it'll be interesting to see how Cub approaches this fight. I would imagine he's going to try and keep it on the feet and just try and do his best to outstrike Kron. But I think Kron gets him down eventually and probably chokes him out. So I'll take Kron in that one. And then the main event is Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the former champion, against Michelle Waterson, who the karate hottie Michelle Waterson, who's coming off of a couple of big wins, and Joanna is coming off a couple of big losses. She had those losses to Rose Namajunas, and then she had that loss against Valentina, which a lot of people were weirded out by her going up to face Valentina, and then now you realize she probably did it for a reason, because she had a really hard time getting to 115. There was talks last week that the fight might not even happen because Joanna might not be able to fight and might not be able to make weight, and they were starting to call on other ladies to try and step in for her. So right now I think Jędrzejczyk made the weight, but when you saw her at weigh-ins yesterday, she looked like she was on death's door. I don't know how she ever made 115, honestly speaking. She's fought the majority of her career at 115, I think, but I don't know how she ever made 115 after watching her in this fight, or in the weigh-ins rather. But this is going to be an interesting fight for Joanna because she is the better striker, on paper. But Michelle has more sort of in her arsenal. I know Joanna's a longer fighter and has a little bit more of an advantage reach and just sort of, height-wise. So you may see Joanna try and sort of control the distance. But I think Michelle's going to try and step in and try and use some of her karate. And, leg kicks are going to be big in this one. Joanna is one that's known to chop away at the legs. So we'll see what she does with Michelle in this one. This is going to be an interesting one and an interesting legacy one for Joanna. Like, at one point, Joanna was thought to be the greatest champion in the UFC and, in the conversation for UFC history. And now, coming off of, I believe, 3 losses in a row now, that's a tough pill to swallow after starting 15-0, and now you have 3 losses in a row. So I will take Joanna in this one because I think that's how important this fight is for her. But I think Waterson has a really good shot at this one if she can control the distance and sort of get inside in the pocket and not give Joanna too much distance to work with. That's about it, guys. All right. We're going to cut this one a little bit short this week because we've got some things going on the back end here, but you will see next week, guys. We'll be live at Reps. Actually, I won't be, but we as a show will be. Nick will be there. Steve will be there. I know that Mike from Reps will be there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to have a special guest with us next week. Tune in next week and find out. We will have Nick with him in studio, or not in studio. I'm sorry. We'll be live at Reps. And then I will be in New York next week, but the following week I will be back in studio, so we'll be talking a bunch of crazy MLB stuff, I'm sure. We'll be talking about the start of the NBA season, start of the NHL season. I don't want to talk about my Blackhawks right now because they suck right now, but otherwise, very, very exciting time in sports over the next couple of weeks. November is my favorite sports month of all because you get all 4 sports in one month, which is just super awesome. And yeah, you'll start to see, hopefully, I think at the end of this month, we'll start to see, some more football stuff that will give us an idea of who the NFL teams are moving forward, and even, to a certain extent, the college teams and who the power, who are the powerhouse teams that are going to take it this year. So again, guys, do us a favor. Check out our website, mackandblack.com. Again, go to the contact tab into the Mack and Black website, and then check out the contact tab, and you can literally ask us anything. Tell us to mention you on the show. ask us for a shout out, ask us for fantasy advice, talk to us about UFC, tell me I'm full of shit about one of my opinions, anything you want. Go to mackandblack.com, go to the contact tab, check it out. We want to start making that more of an interactive thing. Shout out to our sponsors, Nux 3-in-1 Refresher Spray, Intrinsic Marketing, Hodgepodge. We'll throw Hodgepodge in there. Again, guys, it's the Pod River Media Network is our home. Our sister podcast, Boss to Boss Podcast, Local Level Podcast. Shout out to Steve. Shout out to Miro. And the guys, again, guys, just support us. Do us a huge favor if you can. You got a couple minutes, head to iTunes right now and just give Mack and Black a nice review. Say nice things about us. It goes a long way because we want to continue to move up the charts and just continue to put out good stuff for you guys. So again, locallevelshow.com is for the Local Level Podcast. We got Pod River Media Network that will have Boss to Boss in there as well as Mack and Black stuff in there. And then again, guys, mackandblack.com. Check out all of our stuff and say nice things about us. Until next week, again, next week, live at Reps in Rolling Meadows, 3200 Kirchhoff Road. Nick will be there. I will not, but I will be trying to call in because there's going to be so much sports stuff going on. I want to make sure we get to it. But again, guys, thank you guys so much for the support, continued support. We will see you next week. Peace.